he said go, so I follow instructions well. Shall we do a roll call?
Amagashi, Gorman,
Here.
Jetzer,
Here.
McKee,
Here.
Mertens, here. Perry, Farmer, Eden, Sanders,
Here.
Shimming.
Here.
Really?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, we're
Wow.
off on a good start today.
Yeah, wow. Okay, we're ready to roll.
Okay. We need a motion with regard to approval of the minutes. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Second.
Second. All approved, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Do we have any public appearances for non-agenda items? I don't think so. Nobody is here. And we can move on to the introductions for our new member of the committee. Joyce, do you want to make the introductions?
Sure. Jennifer Clary was our CETA appointee, and she has left and moved to Middleton. So Jennifer, she joined us on Thursday and graciously volunteered to be the CETA representative on the Housing Advisory Committee. So would you like to say a few words and introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. So I'm Jenny Sanders. I've lived in Fitchburg for about 24 years, I think. Lived in a couple of neighborhoods around here, and I've raised my children here, and they're grown now. But my husband and I own a marketing agency together, and I'm also a realtor with First Weber. I'm the president of the Seminole Women's Club neighborhood group with about 90 women members. So I always try to kind of stay really connected to our residents and friends and neighbors. And yeah, so I volunteered for this. It feels like something I would be really interested in and passionate about, obviously with housing. So I'm excited to be here.
Well, welcome, Jenny. Thanks so very much.
Thank you.
Maybe we all want to just introduce ourselves as well. You want to start, Marshall?
I will. I'm Marshall Mertens, and I'm a resident in Fitchburg. Hello.
Lean into it.
Oh, wow.
Now we hear you.
Okay. I'm Marshall Mertens, and I'm a resident of Fitchburg. Moved here about 5 years ago. I am a retired housing developer, affordable housing developer, but primarily in Washington State. So there are some differences state by state, but that was my background. And so, as I like to say, I drank the Kool-Aid years ago.
My name's Mallory Gorman. I've been a resident of Fitchburg, I think, for over 3 decades. My husband's family's been here since the 1850s. So I'm a retired tax attorney for Baker Tilly. I worked in construction real estate, and I just retired during COVID. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was a good choice. Absolutely. Brian?
Oops. Sorry about that. Brian Chimming, I was the Chief Operating Officer at WIDA for 4 years and served before that for 4 years as Administrator of the Wisconsin Division of Housing and Intergovernmental Relations at the Department of Administration, resident of Fitchburg for about 30 years.
Brian McKee. I'm a lifelong resident of Fitchburg. I think our family's been in Fitchburg since the early 1840s, before Wisconsin was a state. I'm president of Midwest Homes, so we're a residential custom single-family builder, and McKee Associates commercial general contractor, do land development in Fitchburg and other communities. So been working in and around the city for many years.
Mike Z, good to see you again. Been with the city 28 years.
You know me too, so we'll just pass it on to Bill.
Well, but just by pure coincidence, it'll be 28 years for me this coming January for this. Yeah, so cool.
Anniversary.
First time politician, though. I just took office here as alder, took over Mayor Julia's old seat in April. By day, I'm in IT consulting, and by evening, I read a lot of city documents.
Okay. The next agenda item is, who's online? We don't have, Godwin's not online. Is Olivia online?
Nope.
Nope. So, nobody online. Next agenda item is the discussion of the Efficiency Navigator Program. And we have, looks like we have 3 guests for this evening. We're going to have an overview, I believe, of the program. Why don't you, hi, how are you? Introduce yourselves.
Maybe I'll just start out with kind of giving a little bit of an overview of where we're at with the Efficiency Navigator program. If you recall, early on, we ranked how we wanted to, or what our priorities as a collective group, what we felt we needed to focus on, and one of them was bringing up the standards of our older multifamily apartments. And so we engaged early on and had a presentation maybe 2 years, I would say, ago from the Efficiency Navigator program that was operating in the city of Madison at that time. I don't know if you guys recall. So what they do is, this is Claire with Sustain Dane, and they have a partnership with Elevate Energy. They come in and do energy efficient upgrades to, we're going to be shooting for about 80% of median income, anything from weatherization to replacing heating systems. So since this week was something that we had all kind of informally agreed upon that would be a focus of our attention, we wanted to bring them back and just give an update of where we're at, and also really do a formal action that Jennifer could take back to CETA and let them know, yep, we want to move on with this program, and then CETA can direct staff to start the process. We did include funding in the 2024 budget based upon the estimate that we had gotten from Claire, and we're going to refine that as we work through the contract. And Claire, do you have anything that you would like to share?
Well, hi, I'm Claire Schaefer-Olekchak. I'm the Executive Director of Sustain Dane. Thank you, Joyce and Mike, for working with you. Thank you for the committee for having us here again, and the write-up we put together for a more formalized document. As Joyce said, we started the work in 2020 in Madison. We did expand to Middleton last year, or I guess a year and a half ago. Fitchburg would be our 3rd community added into the program. And then we just got a call from Monona about a week ago, too. So it's been really successful and growing. And we did a tour a couple weeks ago with some city staff of the healthy neighborhoods, and are really excited about the alignment of the work we're doing and the opportunities in your neighborhoods. Would you like me to go through the proposal in more detail, or be available for questions?
I think if you want to just kind of give an overview, we do have 2 new members and one that hasn't been here for a bit, and he probably isn't kind of up to speed with what's going on. So maybe just a quick overview would be great.
Can do. Let me first introduce the other team members. We have Spencer Bierman here. He's with the Sustain Dane team. And then Leslie Sheridan is with the Elevate team, which is our partner on the project. So, all right, so brief summary. Overall program has been going since 2020, and we've completed assessments on over about 175 units, and then completed retrofits on about 100 units, primarily in Madison and in Middleton. The upgrades that we're doing are focused on energy efficiency and reducing the energy burden on residents in these homes. It's very important to the program. Also really important is reducing the CO2 emissions. This is a group of housing that for a long time has been falling through the cracks in terms of being upgraded. So the program was designed with all of those challenges and opportunities in mind. We've been seeing an average energy bill reduction of about $300, $500, and have included a number of different implementations. So wall insulation or attic insulation. We have been able to move to air source heat pumps in some of the buildings. We have been able to add ventilation. We look at health and safety as well when we go into these buildings. Really do a whole home approach, I would say, for everything we could do to make residents more comfortable, healthy, and make the buildings more efficient and reduce the cost. And we also were able to stop 2 gas leaks and 1 carbon monoxide exposure through our previous work. So for the program in Fitchburg, as in with all the communities, we want to make sure that it is tailored to the goals and the direction of that neighborhood. So we've spent a good amount of time with Joyce and Mike, and we look forward to spending more time with you as a committee as well. We put together some kind of framing of what we believe the program here would, like how it would unveil. So the collaboration with you guys, also community economic development on this program, and using this year as a demonstration or pilot so that we continue to learn and refine as we're going. City staff, and including the building inspector, will be working with us to select the priority buildings for doing assessments and then determining the criteria that we want to include in that assessment when we go into the buildings. So for instance, we talked about including in there what is the fire suppression system that exists, which has not traditionally been part of our assessments, and we know that's really important based on conversations we've had for Fitchburg. So after we complete the assessment work, what we would like to then do is take a moment and put together a summary of what we saw in the assessments across all of the different buildings and put together a recommendation for implementation. We'd want to come back and talk with city staff, you guys, we wanted to make sure that we are all aligned on where we can make the biggest impact of the implementations. Then we would go forward with that work. While part of the unique process that we offer is we start from the beginning, building the relationship with the owner and residents. We have the energy assessment, we have the data, and then we continue through the contractors coming through, maybe contractors falling out and getting the new contractor in to complete implementation as well as close out. And if there's any, conversations and education to happen about maybe a new system or ways, that a resident would benefit from the new program, we're there for that. We are also looking at, of course, the Inflation Reduction Act rebates and tax credits that are available, and using the buildings working in as case studies for how other buildings can also take advantage of those tax credits. And then lastly, this project is part of a much larger energy efficiency navigator program that is being considered countywide. Fitchburg was part of a grant that was submitted to the Department of Energy. It was called the Energy Futures Grant, which would allow even more additional funding to help with the planning and continued growth of this program in Fitchburg. So I think that's a good summary to get us started, and I'm here to answer questions if there are additional questions. Also, Joyce, please do feel free to add in something I may have missed.
No, I think you gave a great overview. We're going to have a discussion based upon our visits as well. So maybe we'll be able to share some additional insight with you after this meeting, and I put together kind of the comments. So anybody have any questions for Claire, Spencer, or Leslie?
I just had one question with regard to the IRA. So as we come toward the end of the year, I think the funding is almost used up. Is that funded on an annual basis? So when we begin January and we have rebates or tax credits that we're looking for, do you know how that works? Is there another pool of money that then becomes available for the next year?
Yeah, so we'll be able to, so we currently have been taking advantage of the focus on energy rebates. So those often include our current program. Our understanding is about mid-year next year, there'll be clarification on the additional incentives that are available as well. So we will continue to be tracking that and working on that to add it into and weave it into this program.
Okay. Does anyone else have any questions? Bill?
Yeah, I was furiously taking notes as you were talking, but did you tell us how many, how many units are you going to assess and how many will be selected for upgrades?
Yeah, so we're thinking around like 3 to 5 properties, so kind of 12 to 24 units is the assessment pool. And, we can talk about that and be flexible with that, but that's kind of where we're kind of thinking to start. And then the upgrades will depend on how far the funding can go. So a, kind of weatherization project, package, kind of 10 to 15,000, all the way up to maybe electrification, which could be, $50,000 to $75,000. And that's why we're going to come back after we do the assessments and give you guys some scenarios for different direction we could go. So, we hope to do implementation in all those buildings, if not more. But it will really depend on what we learn when we do the energy assessments.
Can you talk a little bit more about the selection process and the qualification process?
Yeah. So this is something that we guided by Fitchburg. We are focused on the healthy neighborhoods as the main areas that are most in need. So my understanding is that would be Jamestown, it'd be the Belmar, Allied, Duns Marsh area, the kind of north side, and then also Southdale. And those are the neighborhoods that we visited for our tour when we went around. In terms of selection of the buildings, we're going to be working closely with Jack Pearson, the building inspector, who knows many of these properties and the property owners already. The other factors that we're going to get layered on are going to be who pays the utilities. So we traditionally in our programs have focused or prioritized buildings where the resident pays the utilities, and that's where the largest savings would occur. We also would be selecting buildings where the owners would agree to a 5-year community benefits agreement that they would not raise their rent more than the HUD established affordable housing rent. So that'd be important. And then also we look at the assessments and determine buildings that have a higher use of energy currently, more than what is standard for their building size and type. So there'd be a larger impact in the measures being implemented. There are other factors that we are happy to layer in and would take feedback, to make sure that's all being considered.
Marshall?
I'm going to take you back to the tax credits again. You said that you use tax credits to help fund your program. Yes? Can you hear me?
Clarification. Clarification. We've been using focus on energy rebates.
But only the rebates, okay. And this
to date, it's only been rebates.
And the tax credits are coming this coming year, right? Mm-hmm. And do you have any understanding, again, to that same question, having been in the low-income housing tax credits, those are 15 years. These would probably be shorter, 3-5 years or something like that. Do you have any idea how much money is going to be available in that credit pool?
No, I do not, and we won't be using affordable housing tax credits.
I realize that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
But I mean, there will be a pool of tax credits available, I assume.
Yes, there will.
And this different program.
The projects. Yes, some of the kind of questions we're working through with our existing buildings and municipal partners is if a tax credit's available. And an owner would need to actually buy or would need to purchase the implementation. Currently in the program, we pay the contractor and we don't have the owner pay directly. Mm-hmm. So we'd have to talk through that, and we could look at that when we're doing the assessments too about what those differences might be in those different models.
Okay, thank you.
Do you have certain criteria that you follow for choosing vendors and partners to complete the work? Are there certain qualifications you require?
So we put together an RFP for implementation. We have a pretty good pool of contractors at this point, and are always open to adding new people into the RFP process. So if there are some local businesses in Fitchburg here that we may not have worked with yet, we would welcome a connection with them. We also run a separate program with Latino Academy, which is a contractor accelerator program to help Black and brown contractors who are doing work maybe adjacent to energy efficiency gain their knowledge and credentials. So there is another pool of about 10 contractors that are kind of emerging into this space that we hope to grow our work with.
Just on another note, we did do an introduction to Sustain Dane with the Mackenzie Workforce Group. They met with Alan, I believe, and had a conversation. So we're trying to hook them up with as many people as possible. And we even discussed the Wisconsin Latino Chamber of Commerce that's located here. So part of that Future Energies grant is to kind of take the funding that we would get if successful. It was quite a collaboration of, it was City of Madison, City of Sun Prairie, Sustain Dane, Elevate Energy, Middleton, Madison. It was, and we put in money to scale this project. So what that planning grant would be for, if we're successful, is to come up with marketing materials and program materials, contracts, things like that, that we could scale this. And I believe Eau Claire signed on to that grant too, didn't they, Claire?
Yep, Elevate's doing some work in Eau Claire as well.
To scale the program, and then if we're successful with round one, then we could apply for funds for round two, which is actually for implementation. And based on the groups that have already done this program, they feel that this is something that could be scalable to the state. Because it doesn't really take a whole lot to get people engaged once they've learned about the program. So we're hoping that we hear something, I believe, like right around the first of the year, whether or not we're successful. But I'll thank Claire and Elevate, and the City of Madison really took the lead on that, but it was a lot of work. So we're hoping that we're successful in that grant.
Does anyone have any other questions? So I think at this point, then we need to have a motion to recommend.
Sure.
So that Jenny can take this to CETA, this program that we're interested in.
So what I guess my guidance here would be for a motion to recommend to CETA that they move the Efficiency Navigator program forward. And they take the lead on working on the contract, and then they can direct staff, being Mike and I, to work on the next steps.
And it's within the recommended budget amount of, we've got $390,000 in the 2024 budget for this program.
And it's within that amount?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So would someone like to make the motion then? Move forward
I'll make the motion as Joyce stated.
so eloquently. I'll second the motion. All in favor? Say aye.
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 All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, Claire, for coming this evening and giving us a synopsis of the program. And we look forward to working with you in the future and getting your assessment of those properties that you looked at with Mike and Joyce.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for coming out, you guys.
Thanks.
Agenda item number 7 is resolutions and ordinances. I don't think we have anything.
No.
Okay. Should we have our item number 8 is the neighborhood visits discussion. Hopefully people brought their notes with regard to our 2 neighborhood visits, and if you did not, were unable to make those, that you were able to see them on your own and have some comments.
Yeah, I think what I would like to do is maybe just kind of go through some of the questions, and I would refrain from anybody making any remarks that would identify a property. If you have comments to make on like one of the streets that we are on, that's fine, but I wouldn't say that, oh, that Brian McKee's property over there on XYZ Street is a dump. So if we could just maybe start by sharing some thoughts. I did get an email from one of our CETA members with his assessment, if you want me to start with that, or if somebody else would like to kind of share their.
Might as well start with that.
So the first question was, what's your first impression of the neighborhood? And his comment, his or her, yes?
Southdale or North Fish?
So this is North Fish and Southdale. These comments are.
Your comments
on-
are just combined?
Yep.
Okay.
So the first impression was very rough. The apartment complexes are not very desirable places to call home. Even the new construction was built on the less, I guess he or she says cheap side, but I guess we'll take it for that. And then also made some comments about what Officer Nate shared with us about the gunshots, drug dealing, prostitution, human trafficking. It became very obvious that the city needs to step up. So that was the comments that I received. Does anybody else want to share any comments on Southdale or North Fish Hatchery Road?
I think one of the overriding themes that I heard for all the properties was inadequate lighting. The lighting issues seem to be consistent and a prominent theme from property to property, whether that's the street lighting, the parking lot lighting, or the exterior building lighting. Either inadequate or it just simply doesn't exist. And I think that was common amongst most of the properties that we saw. Having improved lighting would definitely, upgrade to LEDs on the interior, of which we didn't see. I'm assuming some of these properties don't have upgraded interior lighting, in the common areas. But also for the landlord and the tenant, it would save on, utility costs. It would enhance the security for the residents of those buildings. It can mitigate some of the poor site planning for some of these residences with when the garages are loaded in the back. That seemed to be a significant issue when we were talking to Officer Nate. And, bad exterior lighting is an attractive nuisance for illegal activity. So that lighting issue seemed to be fairly important. And when you're talking about security, cameras seem to be secondary. In some instances, we had properties where there were cameras, but the property management company wasn't educated as to how to use them. That was an issue. Some of the properties didn't have cameras. But enhancing the security with the lighting and the cameras, I think could be, would definitely improve those properties that we looked at. Some other comments that I had with regard to the properties, some of these buildings were built in the 80s. They have, as Brian had mentioned when we were visiting those properties, they wouldn't be up to code now. Some of them have wood windows. They're just inefficient. Their building envelope is inefficient with regard to, maintaining heating and cooling and such like that. And the trash seemed to have been an issue as well as a lot of these properties. Disposal was a problem, inadequate facilities, whether they had them or they didn't have them. That seemed to be prevalent, not at all of them, but at some of them. In some of the neighborhoods that we went to, it wasn't it was a mixed bag. We'd have one property that was fairly well maintained, and then one next to it wasn't, and then one was poor. So it wasn't like there was a consistent theme, but some of them did have mature landscaping. It looked like the landlords had tried to upgrade the exteriors, etc. So those were some of my observations that I had on the properties.
I'm sorry, because I was thinking North Fish, which is where it looks so much different than it did even 5 years ago. You think about how much has changed even in 3 to 5 years over there, but we want to make it more desirable for some of the nicer property, for the whole neighborhood. It's changed so much, so that's a concern I have too, is that we want to bring that whole neighborhood up, and that's why these kind of recommendations, I think, are important. And I was thinking about it in terms of somebody I know who moved to town recently, was looking for a reasonable place to live, had to get in within a couple of weeks, and was a little concerned about the visuals, because we had sent, a couple of us had done a short list of things to go look at. And so this is an important topic, especially for North Fish, because the whole neighborhood, and we're trying to do a lot of things there, and there's a huge investment in that neighborhood right now, as there should be. We need, and it's one of the main entrances to Fitchburg.
I think that's a good segue into question number 2, which is, based upon your visit, what would you recommend the city as priority for reinvestment from the neighborhood perspective? Some of the comments we've heard and some of the comments that were made by the CETA member was more and better lighting, good surveillance cameras, keep the parking available for the leaseholders, insist upon better management and tenant screening, enforce regulations about who may occupy the apartments. In designing new apartments, make sure that everything is highly visible, and then more police presence in the neighborhoods. So I don't know if anybody else has any comments on things that they saw as a priority.
I was going to say, I think one of the common elements was definitely the lighting was an issue, whether it was street lighting, only being at intersections, and even some of that lighting being outdated, not new LED lighting that might be better dispersed, and then lighting within the site of the units themselves was definitely an issue. And I think as Fitchburg moves forward, when they're doing planning and zoning, it seemed to be a common comment from Nate, at least Officer Nate, was that a lot of these front-loaded buildings with parking behind has definitely created an unintended location for bad things to happen. And so I think as zoning and planning look at new options and new avenues, that whole concept of front-loading buildings needs to be evaluated, that parking can't be just centralized and condensed in the middle of an area, because it creates a spot where the police can't get to safely, technically, between buildings.
I know another thing that Officer Nate mentioned was traffic flow in some of the neighborhoods. And so difficult for people to walk around their neighborhood. It was congested, especially along Fish Hatch as you're going by the school. He was mentioning some challenges there. But I know the area that was once the town of Madison, or the village of Madison, was completely different than the other areas that were literally in the area of Fitchburg prior to their being added to our property rolls. And so I thought the problems over there were slightly different than the ones I found in Fitchburg proper. So, they weren't part of the planning over the years, but they also tended to be older and a little bit more rundown. They had trees, a lot of trees in front of them, which is a good thing because it makes the neighborhood seem more warm and welcoming, but it is a bad thing because it blocks views. So I don't know about any ideas on planting that might be part of the future as well.
comments by anybody on those two neighborhoods?
I was just going to comment about the staffing turnover, and it's not, I think, unique to Fitchburg. It's just the industry in general as far as the turnover, and that's been a challenge for us as city staff, just having regular contacts when issues do arise. Every couple of weeks, it seems like various properties have a new manager or somebody's left. So that's been a real challenge for us to just kind of maintain regular contact when there are issues that arise at properties. One thing that the mayor included and the council supported is a housing specialist position in 2024 to work with Joyce and I. And one of the responsibilities, hopefully, there will be kind of ongoing and regular communication with some of our multifamily properties to hopefully kind of maintain that regular communication and coordination with whoever the on-site or designated property managers are. So hopefully that'll help in the future. But sometimes we're scrambling a little bit trying to identify who even to contact at some of the properties as it keeps changing.
So the next question is about specific properties, and you can share that information with me offline if you'd like, if you have an address or a specific property. When I went out last couple weeks ago with the Dane and Elevate staff, we actually identified some addresses and properties, and then Jack went out to MG&E and just hopped on to look at what their utility bills were. And some of the units were well over $400 a month for utilities. So we started a little list of properties that needed to be looked at right away. And it is some of the properties that we as a collective group identified as well. So I was glad that, that there really is a need to have this done. So then the next question is, using your professional lens, how would you characterize the overall condition of the multifamily stock in the neighborhood? The CETA member said that it was basically from poor to fair. Nothing really stood out. Maybe some of the newer buildings were in better condition, but just that there needs to be maintenance and improvement, and then also addressing the crime issues would help bring up the neighborhood. Any other comments? I mean, Ned did share a lot of information with us when we were out, and I thought it was really beneficial to have him there to address some of the things from a safety perspective, because that is one of the things Mike and I are very concerned about, especially fire safety with some of these older units. Does anybody else have any comments? Brian?
I know that there was a state statute passed that the Builders Association worked hard to get approved, is that the fire departments have to track the age of the buildings of where fires happen in multifamily units, because many of these buildings were built with different fire codes back in the 70s, 80s, and even in the 90s. And so, to keep track of that so that new construction isn't penalized for old construction fires, if that makes sense. And so I know there's some data out there that the fire department has had to keep for, I think, the last 5 years or so on some of these older buildings with fires and what the source of the fire was, whether it was, I'll say, internal being cooking or a fault, or whether it was wiring, structural, electrical, something like that caused the fire.
And those are some of the things that we talked about of information that we can supply to Sustain, Dane, and Elevate as they start going through their assessment as well. And that we did mention that we wanted to have them with their owner interviews ask about that. What do you have do you have fire extinguishers? Do you have simple things like that. Do your tenants know how to use them? Where are they located? So I think we'll get some really good information and feedback. Prior to the assessment, I think we'll probably sit down with Elevate and Sustain and give them a comprehensive list of all the things that we would like. Because this is our one shot to really get some in-depth information and keep it historical. Bill, you've been pretty quiet, which isn't, something I'm used to. So, do you have something you'd like to share?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't have any, anything specific necessarily on individual properties, but just kind of the general feel as I look at the buildings. You can just kind of tell based on the condition which ones are the oldest and which ones are the newest. And in fact, Jack Pearson, he said, look at some of these brand new buildings that are, recently constructed or still under construction. What do we think they're going to look like 20, 30, 50 years from now? And I had asked him, does he have a good feel? Like, how much should be reinvested in a property to keep it fresh, like perpetually? And, he didn't have a figure off the top of his head. I did go ask Google, and I think the most popular answer was something like 1% of the current value every year should be set aside. So I guess using a single-family home as an example, in Fitchburg, the average the median home is somewhere in the neighborhood of $380,000. And think about things like a roof that lasts 25 years and costs you about $25,000. You should save $1,000 a year. You could do similar calculations for siding, driveway, landscaping, all the exterior, windows in your home. And then inside, you want to do a bathroom remodel every couple of decades, a kitchen remodel every couple of decades, replace your floors, etc. And you combine all of those numbers, and you probably get something in the neighborhood of 1%. So, like if you own a home, look at your last year's tax bill. About half that would be the amount you should be saving, and that's a good chunk of change. For a median home, it's $3,800 a year. Then, how many people are doing that? And then, how do you then translate that into multifamily properties? Hopefully, there are economies of scale so that that 1% would go further than in an individual single detached family home. But how can we get property owners to actually do something like that? And how do you keep that affordable for the tenants? But really, that's the only way that you're going to be able to keep everything fresh. And like we just had this wonderful presentation about the efficiency navigator. That wouldn't be necessary if we could go back in time and build things, quote unquote, right the first time. So I guess using that as context, how do we, from this point forward, say, all new construction should conform to certain standards, because we've seen some of the multifamily homes were relatively new, but still looked old, and it's because they were, they used kind of cheaper construction methods, and with the goal of being to keep the rents down. But how long can a building like that actually keep costs down before it just, the operating expenses start to dominate? And you get these instances, like you noted, where utilities in each individual unit can be $400 a month. That's crazy. I guess I'm hopeful that the housing specialists that we hire can work, like you said, with the property management companies and the property owners themselves, and maybe, have them spruce things up a little bit. I'll also say there's an additional position in the budget for 2024 for a grant writer, and I hadn't thought about this until this evening, but maybe there are grants specific to housing that we can take advantage of, and having someone dedicated to writing grant proposals could really help with our workforce housing or the efficiency navigator program.
There's one thing that I think when this program is set up, Fannie Mae has a list of life cycle expectancies for multifamily, pretty much any component that goes into them, from roofing, siding, et cetera. And so I think that's one of the things that should be looked at component-wise when they look at this. You know, I know, Bill, you talked about cheaper products on apartments, but like Fannie Mae's life cycle for vinyl siding is 40 years and for cement siding is 45. And so for the extra 5 years of life cycle, the value for most multifamily really isn't there if you're trying to keep the price down, because it can affect the cost of a 30-unit apartment building by 70 grand, which will make the rents much higher in that building just by changing the siding cladding, but you're only getting 5 more years of life cycle out of it. And that's where the value, cost value engineering has to go into some of these products that are going to be put on these buildings, that vinyl siding might be the answer in order to make sure that we hit the rents, because they have a near same life cycle. And that's why I want to make sure when planning starts talking about doing their revisions and code things and what things that they want to look for in architectural reviews of projects, is that they can't go pushing too much of these high-end products on apartments, because the life cycle value of these products is not much longer than some of the less expensive products. So that's just something that used to be in the criteria, I guess, for determining, because some of these buildings that might be 60 years old now, you know, if they're built in the early 70s, or I guess 50 years old now, some of the products that are in there, the windows, the roofing, the siding, should all have been replaced by now. Whether it is cement siding or vinyl siding,
Right.
whether it's wood windows or aluminum windows, they all should have been replaced by now based on those criteria. And so maybe that's one of the things that the evaluator can look at is, have they been changed, when they were changed, and are there other builders that are older that need change because of the age, I guess. That makes sense.
I think that was one thing that we, being Mike and I, have always kind of noticed as the difference between like the mom and pop managed buildings and the professionally managed buildings. Because I think sometimes mom and pop really don't know how to manage a building. They just get the rent and you know, occasionally they got to go out and fix something, but I don't think they have an account for reserves and things like that. And that was one thing we've talked about is, could we bring somebody in that does just a little seminar on how to be a good manager? Because I think we could, you know, invite some of our owners to come in and I'm sure they'd appreciate it, you know, how to screen a tenant. That has been one thing that, you know, and what they can do if a tenant has people who aren't on the lease staying there, or, you know, things like that. So that was another kind of idea, but when there's just two of us, we can't do it all. But that is something that we've talked about, you know, the proper way to manage a building. Marshall, you might even have some insight into that.
Property management is a very challenging job, and it does not particularly pay well either for the property site manager. And so then you also have the guidance from the overall organization. They should have a capital reserve. I mean, all affordable housings has a capital reserve, and at the time when I retired, they were starting to ask for operating reserves as well in order to get tax credits, because it is a challenge to have these properties run properly and well. And yes, and if, you know, I think that would be really good for the smaller individually managed properties, that they know, you know, when is the time that they can give a notice to a tenant because there's too many people or because the police have come too many times. I think different management companies have their different criteria as to how they set that up. Same thing with screening criteria. And I don't know if the city has available for people to screen for known felons and all of that. I mean, as a mom and pop, you put down if you've ever been charged with a felony and someone says no, they don't know where are they gonna go. You know, a management company has resources and they pay for those resources, right? They can do it locally and you can do it nationally. I don't know how many do it nationally. So I know that sometimes people slip through if they don't have a national database that they're looking for. So it is a challenge. It is something that was brought up repeatedly. And you can look in the neighborhoods, and I was going, well, I thought the Fish Hatch side looked like it wasn't mature. Some of the properties were dated, it's true, but some of them were very well kept and looked quite nice. You know, I'm assuming the inside's as good as the outside. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. And some of them were really in rough shape. So whether they're in rough shape because they have an absent REIT owning them with a poor management company, don't know. Whether it's a mom and pop that decided, oh yeah, we can take on a 24-unit building. Yeah. But I mean, the proper management and proper screening would make a big difference in, I think, the amount of crime and the livability of the communities. Also, one of the things that in the more recent years in multifamily buildings has become a place, an amenity like a community room. These older buildings have nothing like that, where a property manager can try and put together like, oh, we're going to have, you know, a St. Patty's Day potluck and, you know, everyone come down with something so you can build a sense of community among the neighbors so that people feel safer, they know their neighbors, something's not right in a unit, you'll have people will say something. So, I mean, those are things I don't know that you can individually add anything like that in an older building, but maybe you can look at in any future buildings and in working with the current structures that we have of putting in a community space of some sort. It doesn't have to be huge, but a community space that's available to the property owners in that region. I know you're doing a lot with the parks, and I know I've heard lots of things about the parks costs and all that, but I mean, that would be a benefit that could truly help some of the communities. The community that was the town of Madison is so isolated from the rest of Fitchburg that it would be really hard to feel like you're part of Fitchburg because you've got the Beltline and, you know, there's lots of, you know, demographics that are like a mountain or a river or a lake that are preventing that particular part of now Fitchburg to feel a part of the rest of us. So, yeah, that's about it.
I was just going to your point, Marshall, we had the Maple Lawn Apartments where the group that got tax credits there, they actually did a community room to an older property, and then they added garages as well. But they had a community room, a computer room, and I think even a little fitness center in there that they added to bring that sense of community and to have that amenity on site. I think Bill had it.
Yeah, so Marshall, you mentioned, well, and Joyce, you know, proper screening of tenants and, you know, the ability to, for instance, determine whether somebody was ever convicted of a felony. Those people need to live somewhere too, and I don't know how we reconcile that fact with, hey, we don't want any violence or, you know, crime happening in our community. How does that, what are best practices?
So, I mean, so basically the organization that I worked for was if you, and this is a challenge for someone who is an ex-felon who does not have a family member who's willing to take them in. There are programs that develop property for ex-felons, usually churches or nonprofits or the organizations that would do something like that. But in the screening, it's like, well, I mean, you are certainly not going to want as a felon anyone. We had a 7-year limit so that if you had been charged with a felony within the last 7 years, you were not eligible to live at our property. If you were involved in a violent crime or the abuse of children or any of the larger, more serious kinds of felonies. I mean, there's, you know, check kiting and, you know, stealing a car, and if it's a Maserati, well, automatically it's a felony, right? Kind of thing that is completely different. And so you have to look at that. I don't know if there are any communities or any apartment buildings in this region. I'm sure there must be something in Madison for ex-felons, but it is a challenge, and it is difficult to decide about that. And that has to be left to the management company because they're the ones that know just how savvy their on-site manager is, how good they are at dealing with. We had one property that was a VA property, and so, with the tax credits, the VA, and it was like crazy. But you do have then, veterans that are dealing with PTSD and self-medicating and have maybe a charge against them for, spousal abuse or something like that. So you have to kind of look at a more whole picture, but that has to be left to the management company because they got to know their staff. I mean, we could, as a city, decide that we want to do something for ex-felons. I've never heard of a city doing that. I think Madison would be a better location for that because there's public transit, there's, more jobs available that are not, require a college education. It would be a better situation for that, or, I don't want to say that Madison has to take the bad people, but, not with that thought through it. It's just that there are more buses, there's more amenities, there's more support to help someone re-enter society than you would find in Fitchburg. I don't know how far you would have to go to find, a social worker here. I know that there's one, but that's for seniors at the senior center. But I don't know about a social working office that our city might have, where I'm sure there's probably several offices in Madison for a social worker where you can go in and get some help or support or get assigned a social worker to help you through a challenging time.
If somebody with a felony conviction is attempting to find housing and can't, are the property managers and the people who are doing the screening, do they have the tools to properly refer them? Because, everybody's got to live somewhere. So if I'm unable to get in at an apartment complex, can the property management company help me find housing elsewhere? And is that something potentially that, our new housing specialist would be able to assist with, or is that, kind of outside their purview? I don't know.
I think in the past when we've had inquiries for that, it's usually been a referral to the Dane County Housing Authority because they kind of serve as our entity kind of through even the voucher programs and everything. So they've always been a resource for us that we've directed people to.
Well, again, I'm going to say that my experience is not here in Wisconsin, it's in Washington State. And there was a number there that you could call for, you got evicted, right? And there were organizations that would help you find a place to live, get your first month's rent or your security deposit. That's a challenge for someone who's been evicted. There were properties that would kind of overlook one eviction charge, maybe not three. That's another kind of screening criteria. Has someone been evicted prior or not for non-payment, or why were they evicted? I thought I saw something just recently about a 611 number that's been created for people to call to get support. But don't take that for gold. Take that for that's
I think
floating
it's
around in the back of my
211.
head. What?
I think it's 211.
211 for support for, maybe it was only suicide. So that's suicide support, but this one was a different number. There is the possibility that the county itself could come up with a referral service and referral numbers for the organizations that had the capability to help someone who's in a tough spot, like if you're an ex-felon or if you're evicted or your food has run out and you don't have any food for your kids for the next week. So a lot of the churches will do that, and I'm sure that Dane County's Housing Authority has some references in that. Then perhaps we should have that number available, and maybe I'm not offering to compile it, but
I know that, I believe Oak Hill, our prison farm out here.
Yeah.
They do, what did we determine the word was? Reentry programs for their inmates, and they work with them on housing and
Finding a job.
jobs and everything like that. So I know that there are programs out there, and like a lot of times if somebody reaches out to us, we'll send them to the Tenant Resource Center.
Okay.
Or, sometimes I'll send them to WEDA. It depends exactly what they're asking for. We pretty much have nowhere to send them at least.
Yeah.
So our next question, getting back to kind of our neighborhood assessment, we haven't really talked about single-family housing. Obviously, in Southdale, there isn't any. Well, I guess there is a couple, but I don't even know if I think there were 9. I don't think we really went by any of them. And most of them are kind of in an area where they'd be, the highest and best use for them are not single-family houses. But North Fish Hatchery Road, do we have any that are really,
The 3 that we had were removed.
well, I guess we
South
don't
of the
need to talk
duplex
about
there.
that then. So why don't we talk about the other neighborhoods, since I think we did a good job with North Fish Hatchery Road in Southdale, unless anybody else has any comments to make. Mr. Schimming? Nothing? How about you, Jenny? Do you have any kind of observations just from being a resident here? See, I'm like that school teacher, If I don't think you're paying attention, I'm going to call on you. Scott's next.
I mean, obviously I'm so new to all of this, but having lived here for 24 years, I mean, I echo all of it. I see it, I hear it. It's an issue, and oftentimes, I mean, even though I focus on, people buying properties here, oftentimes they're coming out of rentals. Or I have people relocation that need a rental temporarily until they buy something. So often conversations go to, well, are there good rental areas here? And, so that's always kind of it's an issue. So, but no, I wish that I could turn the clock back and be, participate in all of that. It would have been very interesting to hear everyone's notes, but...
Well, you're always welcome to, we can always take you out if you'd like to go. I know Olivia wasn't able to go the last time, so she asked after the first of the year if we could, take her out. So
none of it's shocking, though, to me. I'm anxious to hear if there's any other neighborhoods that were covered as well.
So the other 2 neighborhoods that we have 4 healthy neighborhoods that the city has identified as some of our areas that have higher poverty rates, higher unemployment, and that would be the North Fish Hatchery Road, Southdale neighborhood, Belmar, Dunn's Marsh area, and then Jamestown. So those were the 4 areas that we were kind of focusing our attention on, which does have a lot of that housing stock that developed before we were a city. So late 60s, 70s, early 80s. So why don't we switch over to maybe Belmar? Any comments on that other than the ones we've already heard? If you recall, this is the neighborhood where we were kind of just chatting and the young lady came out and the door fell off. In case you needed a refresher. And then she just kind of put it up against the unit and moved on.
That neighborhood had some units that were in pretty bad shape that had not been maintained. There was the one where they had balconies that had stairs that were removed. That building was horrible. That building, I don't know that you could even rehab that building. But, I think in the older neighborhoods in Fitchburg, again, it's that mixed media kind of thing going on. You have some buildings that are absolutely horrid. And then, like 2 doors down, you can have someone that has taken great care of it. This style is dated, but it doesn't mean that the units are not nice on the inside if they've been kept up and had, new flooring and new carpet put in from the original, one would hope. But, it again is that kind of mixed where you've got to pull out the individual units. I'd say that's the same thing with the homes. Some of the homes are obviously beloved and have been painted, and I swear some of the people go out and they must clip the lawns with their scissors or something. Someone who really loves their house, and the gardens are beautiful, and then you can go halfway down the street and it's like the last time they mowed it was when. So and I don't know. I'm assuming some of these may be houses that are rented and some of them may be houses that are owned. And you never know. People have hard times and maybe don't have the ability to go out and mow. I don't know how many of them might be seniors and they can't physically mow their lawns anymore and can't afford a lawn maintenance thing. There's all kinds of reasons why sometimes a unit doesn't look up to snuff. But that neighborhood was, I thought, very mixed. I thought it was mixed with some horrible and then some nice. Style was atrocious, but not well-kept units. So,
I guess one of the things that's just keeps going through my head is the landlords. I just, how can we hold them more accountable? It's frustrating because at the end of the day, they're the ones who are ultimately responsible for all of these things. And what can we do as a city to hold landlords more?
One thing that we learned from the early days of the Ridgewood Country Club apartments, if you remember, where we had ceilings falling in, fires, a lot of deferred maintenance. We now have a neighborhood resource team that meets across departments that includes everybody from police and fire and building inspection and administration and the city attorney. And they look for those early indicators of, all of a sudden building inspection will say, hey, this property at such and such an address is, looking a little tired and worn, or there's some deferred maintenance, or the police will, share with their colleagues that there's been a spike in police calls. So maybe that's an indicator that maybe somebody isn't utilizing their screening criteria or have relaxed their screening, criteria. So we are more proactive than we used to be. We're kind of learning, as we go along. But to Bill's earlier point, there was one notorious property here that we had issues with, not only with public safety and police calls, but atrocious kind of property maintenance and condition. And when I had a conversation with the property owner in particular about that capital replacement fund, he looked at me and he said, well, Mike, I don't have one of those. And I said, well, that's a problem. If you're not setting aside, X amount, percent each month from the rent that's coming in, when the carpets need to be replaced and, the roof and things like that. So I think sometimes you get some folks that, acquire some of these properties thinking they're going to maintain and manage themselves. And they just kind of have unrealistic expectations as far as being a property owner.
Well, and
in some cases.
I get calls, other agents in my office get calls all the time, people from Chicago saying I'm looking to, buy a 4-unit and looking for investment. They just want to buy up whatever's out there,
Yeah.
We have many, many, many people kind of on the list that are looking for properties like that. And you think, well, okay, you live in Chicago, you live in St. Louis, you live, why are you doing this? And how are you going to take care of this property? You're probably not, so.
Yeah.
I think that's what Jack was talking about with regard to that property that Joyce mentioned, that the property owner didn't reside in the state of Wisconsin, if I remember correctly. So you have that problem where you have LLCs that own the property and the investors or whatever are residents of Wisconsin.
Yep.
So it's a lot more difficult, problematic to deal with those properties than others where it's someone locally. So it's a long judicial process, I think, to deal with those particular sites.
I think that's one of the areas where we really need to focus on establishing the good relationships with not only the tenants who feel comfortable, sharing information with us when they're living in poor conditions, or that we have a good relationship with the local property manager, being it whoever it may be. And even finding out that sometimes is really difficult, because I've started working on some things for our database, and I know just making phone calls and things like that, it's really hard to get in touch with an actual person that's on site. And as Mike said, turnover has really been hard. I think some of the best properties are the ones that are built and managed by the owner. They realize the investment that they've made, and they want to maintain that investment.
On the front end of Ridgewood, because that was such a hot spot, my recollection, I think Tom was mayor,
Yes.
where didn't they take a unit and they had a cop shop in there and had multi-level city service and maybe county, but certainly, now, I don't know if we have any of those right now, but that was one where we had to move in and and didn't they end up downsizing the property? Didn't they end up knocking down some buildings and doing some other things?
Yep.
I hope we're not in that situation with some of the properties we picked up in the town of Madison, because we had pretty lengthy discussion here when that whole project was coming about how, not, I don't think to that level, but that they clearly had different codes than Fitchburg had, and had some kind of issues that it was going to take some time to catch up with.
So I think hopefully with the housing specialist position, and also working with Jack, establishing those relationships with the property owners and managers, I think there's some work to do yet, over in Southdale to kind of get those established. Because there's one that's not only out of state, but out of country, I know, with one of the properties there. So just kind of the communication and coordination.
Well,
Any other observations or things? I mean, maybe we should kind of talk about priorities too. I know in Southdale, I know that there's been a pretty big investment in the Southdale Park to get that at least up a little bit with some of the lighting, some of the courts, signage. When we did the TIF district over there, we also included in the project plan some upgrades that we would like to see from just aesthetics and lighting over there is, I believe the light poles are owned by MG&E, which is another challenge for the city that we're going to have to kind of overcome. I think connectivity is one of the things that we noted. Even if you want to ride your bike, you can't, because you can't really get across MM. It's not the best intersection. So we did look at a lot of those things and kind of had a wish list from just a community development aspect. Can you think of anything else that we looked at over there?
No, just the one street connection in particular to go from east to west there.
Latitude?
Yeah. Just because there's kind of an isolated area back there, I know that's something that's important for our police department to get that connection made in the future, although it involves some utility relocation. So we're hoping to build up some new increment from some of the projects that are happening, both Rutabaga and now the climbing gym that's coming south of the pond, to start to build up some increment that could pay for some of those kind of public improvements in that area that would improve the entire neighborhood overall.
If there's no other comments, the one thing that I would ask is that if you wouldn't mind sharing your written notes with me, so I can put everything together and share it with CETA, and possibly Bill might want to make some of these comments at the council as well. I don't know.
For the past couple months, every council meeting we have reports from the various committees and commissions, and Julie has been asking, when are we going to hear something good from Housing Advisory Committee? And I said, well, we haven't met since June, except for the neighborhood walks. So, I think the mayor in particular, and probably the rest of the council, is kind of eager to hear an update.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we could probably move on to the next agenda item. So if you want to if you have your comments with you tonight, you can leave them, or if you want to drop them off, scan them, whatever you'd like to do. And then I'll put together some comments and get it back to Bill, and I'll email it out to you too, so you can kind of see what everybody had to say. Well, I guess I can give an update since the council's asking. The rent-to-own project. As you know, the financial market has been a little bit tough on projects moving forward with the interest rates. So we did engage with, a few weeks ago, with H&A, and they're putting together a memo to talk about where we're at with the project. I've read it, and they have some recommendations, and Mike and I are going to go through the memo and then reach back out to H&A and talk about some of the recommendations that they have in that memo. We have yet to engage with Quarles just because of timing. A lot of things has happened. We did get their opinion, and Mike and I have some comments that we'd like to share with them. So once we have an opportunity to reach out to them, we can report back to you where we're at with kind of their opinion on the risk factors and the affordable units within market rate. We are working on that as well. We've engaged with Ellers to do an analysis, and is it the Index Road project? Does it have a name?
I think it's just referred to as Avalon. Right?
The Avalon, the investors in that property have agreed to kind of provide us with their updated pro forma now that, once again, we've seen the interest rates and the construction costs. 30%, I'm hearing, increase in construction costs, which has kind of put everything on hold. They're going to submit that to Ellers for an analysis to see TID-wise what they would need to fill that gap.
I just spoke with them just this afternoon, so they're going to get Ellers the updated project pro forma, but as Joyce indicated, they said the gap is, of course, getting bigger there, so they said, be prepared, Mike, when the numbers come in and when Ellers does the analysis. But I said that's the kind of information that we need, and then we'll bring it forward to this group and CETA and the council as policymakers and say, if we're attempting to do 10% of the units at 60% in a market rate building, and for how many years, this is what it would take to kind of drive that program, and at least then we can have an informed discussion about it and see if it's worth the return on investment through the TID district. But they're still interested in being kind of a pilot project up there on Index Road in the Avalon building. So hopefully they'll get their numbers in here in the near future. And I told them that our next Housing Advisory Committee meeting was going to be in February. So I said, I'm hoping that they have their pro forma into Ellers, and Ellers can do the analysis, and then we would have something to kind of share with you at that February meeting and just kind of see where we're at with that program. We still think it's an intriguing model of how to add new affordable units in addition to, buildings that are tax credit buildings. But this would allow us to maybe do some other affordable units throughout the city if we're successful with putting together a model that works and that there's support from committee members and policymakers for it.
And then I guess the only other thing is we went to the WIDA conference and learned a bit about the new programs that are coming out from the state for affordable housing. However, it seemed just based on what we learned, we might not be able to qualify for some of them because we need to do certain things with our zoning in order to have developers get some better rates. And we don't have a lot of commercial property that's sitting vacant that we can convert to apartments, so we kind of lose out there. And we don't have a typical downtown that we can convert like the second floor space. So we've been talking with the planning department about, okay, how can we capitalize on this new pot of funds with some of the challenges that we have as a city. So we'll keep you informed on that as well, which would, I guess, lead us into the recommendation from Mayor Julia that we go from meeting quarterly to meeting every other month. I guess she's feeling that maybe we have work to do. However, sometimes I feel like our hands are tied with some of the things we've been working on, because we have been working very hard with our rent-to-own, our efficiency navigator, and our market rate apartments. So one of the questions that I want to propose to all of you is she would like us to meet every other month, but we do have a conflict with another committee that meets at 6:30 on the same evening that we do. So I'm wondering if people would feel comfortable starting the meeting earlier, say at 4 o'clock, like 4 to 6, so that we don't have a conflict with this other group, and it makes it easier for Fact TV to do the meetings in here than to run two meetings simultaneously. So I just want to check on everybody's availability. If we changed our meeting time from 4 to 6, we would still be on the second Monday of the month.
Luckily, I live only a mile away and I work from home.
Okay.
I live a mile away and I'm retired.
All right. And we still have the Zoom option, so if you're not available to hop in here, 4 o'clock, you can hop on Zoom.
And as Joyce looked at, and I looked at the calendar, we would go with February and then every 2 months. Yeah, but February would kind of be our launch in 2024. Although we're also of the mindset we'll meet if there's a reason to meet, but we're not going to call out people if there's not a reason, to meet. Sometimes maybe there's still some work in progress and we don't have anything maybe ready to report, but we've got the capacity to do 6 meetings to keep things moving forward if we need it there.
Just going back to that WIDA program, I mean, there are some very attractive rates out there. Should the city look at trying to set up some criteria to meet the WIDA programs, like discounted fees, discounted rates that are required to be eligible for developers to get part of that? I mean, we just kind of skipped right over it, but there's an opportunity there where we can have a source of funds that we just have to look at, impact fees, development costs, infrastructure costs. Would the city pay for some of those versus having to have the developer pay for some of them? So just, it might be worth us investigating, setting up some criteria that would meet WIDA, how the city could get eligible.
I think that's been a conversation just internally, and I was just talking to Mallory about this, because I know that it's 2024 that we're looking to update our code, right? Our zoning code?
Yeah, in the second half of 2024, what'll launch, right now we've got two neighborhood plans going simultaneously. So we've got the South Stoner Prairie neighborhood plan over at Lacey Road and Fitch-Rona. And then we've got the Greenfield neighborhood plan over here between Sain and Highway 14. So those neighborhood plans are going to be finished up kind of third quarter of 2024. But the second half of 2024, we're going to launch a major comp plan update. Because when we did the major comp plan update in 2019, the policymakers at that time directed staff to only focus on the existing urban service area, other than the Edgewood College kind of addition and the one we did for the Oregon Middle School down in the south area. So we're really in need of a full-blown kind of comp plan review for the entire kind of 35 square miles of Fitchburg and see what comes of that. And then hopefully on a dual track will be a zoning ordinance update and kind of rewrite in some areas. And then also included with that would be our sign code is in desperate need of a refresh and an update as well. So we're hoping that all three of those initiatives will move forward in the second half of, at least start in the second half of 2024. But I'm just wondering if maybe there's somebody at WIDA that we should have come to a February meeting that could just even kind of talk about, that program and, the criteria in advance of some of those initiatives launching, in the second half of 2024. So we're better informed and educated, on what are the criteria to actually even meet the eligibility for those programs.
That would be.
Ryan would. Okay, yeah. I just think it would be helpful to learn more, about it.
It would be a good idea, and it's also with the comp plan coming up, I hope that's an opportunity for the city and the council to kind of look more long-term at what's driving costs here, because we're not always consistent there, and sometimes we forget that we're in competition with every other suburban community around Madison, and we get, as wonderful as we are, we get kind of siloed into our own whatever, and the other communities around. In fact, I was going to ask that before, whether with some of the business expansions, and there's all sorts of great things going on in Fitchburg, but I often wonder how often you're getting the housing question, with these new businesses coming in, with people adding staff and things like that, because we hear it all the time. But I think that policymakers need to look at the issue closely about how Fitchburg can grow in a way that's responsible and safe and affordable, because there's a connection between those things, and I hope the council takes a look at that issue.
I think that's one of the reasons that I don't think, and correct me if I'm wrong historically here, that to do two neighborhood plans simultaneously is unprecedented.
Yeah.
I think in Fitchburg's history, but I had a conversation with Mayor Hooley, and she said, we need to do more for affordable housing. And I said, the best thing we can do for affordability is to help get the market back into equilibrium.
Yep.
Not only from a single family inventory standpoint, but also from a multifamily. And it's not just Fitchburg, it's kind of the whole greater Madison region here, because we all hear the numbers that we're short 10 to 15,000 units, and we're the fastest growing county in the state of Wisconsin here. So we just need to get that pipeline going here. And I know some people are like, well, why do we need to add and expand the urban service area? But that's where we need new subdivisions, coming forward with lots available and also new areas for multifamily housing stock. And then the other unique thing about Fitchburg is we're part of 3 school districts, and we need growth in each of those school districts, as well.
Right.
So families have options and choices as well, and there's housing stock and new housing stock in each of those districts to meet the needs. And to your point, Ryan, about businesses, we had one company reach out to us directly and asked this was in particular new multifamily apartments were being built because that company wanted to get their foot in the door on the front end for their workforce to know where there were going to be units available. Because sometimes it's not even just the cost of the units, it's just even availability of actual units as they're coming online.
In fact, the individual I was referring to before, I was trying to coax him into Fitchburg, and he was struggling. I mean, he was having a hard time finding something. I mean, he's making okay money, but he was struggling. He was a little bit surprised, and this is a person who's lived in some other cities, and he, after I talked to him, he had an appreciation of kind of our unique path that we've been on the last 40 years, so which is a little bit different than some of the other suburbs. But you can't get at the affordability issue when we don't look at the next 10 years instead of straitjacketing ourselves. So there's a balance there, and you can get to it. But so these discussions you're talking about next year are going to be important.
And I'm gonna just push for having a presence from our committees on these major comp plans, because I think it's going to be important for representation of housing in both the comp plan and zoning. Mallory, did you want to share with us what you guys are up to with?
We talked about before, months ago, accessory dwelling units. Go green. There we go. We had talked before about using accessory dwelling units as, one of the tools in the toolbox to provide additional housing, if possible. And in Fitchburg, Terravesa was built with the SMART code, and that permits accessory dwelling units. It's a permitted use, not conditional use. The rest of Fitchburg, under its zoning code as it exists currently, is fairly restrictive. And so the language there talks about a dependency relationship. In other words, it has to be someone who is taking care of somebody else and owner occupied. And so that ordinance exists, but with the SMART code, you can come in and build an accessory dwelling unit in Terravesa. There are none currently. So one of the things that we're doing is we are going to build a residence in Terravesa with an ADU. And to see how the market receives it, we'll act as the construction lender to two individuals who will be in charge of marketing and basically constructing the unit. So hopefully that moves forward and is popular and is received well. And so that would hopefully be the onus for other people to think about that as an option. And then perhaps, we can address our zoning code as it relates to ADUs in the other areas, because I don't think there are too many ADUs in Fitchburg, if there are any at all. I know there aren't any in Terravesa. So we'll see how that progresses.
We think that there might be one or two.
I know there's some in Madison, because my son actually built one in Madison. There are some restrictions that, again, it would be interesting to look at, see how viable they are, how necessary they are. The owner-occupied restriction, that seems to be fairly common, although I'm not sure whether that's required, especially when we have such an issue with regard to affordability and housing stock in general, right? So anyway, we'll see how that goes. I'll report later.
Yeah, I think one of the I try and educate people on Fitchburg as a whole and our housing stock and why we might be a little bit more expensive than other communities because we don't have that pre-war housing stock or post-war housing stock that's kind of your affordable entry level. You buy that, you move up to the next, house as your family expands, and then you're able to, move into something when your kids move out. And I think, when we talk about the accessory dwelling units, we don't see a lot of carriage houses or things above a garage or, a mother-in-law suite or anything like that. So I think that has always been one of the challenges that I think Fitchburg has had because we're just not an old community where, we have those options for people to start out and move up.
So any other business that we need to discuss?
I was just going to ask, once your house and unit is done there, it would be great to come over and tour that.
Sure,
With
absolutely.
the group, just to see it
Yeah.
and everything, to get a visual.
Absolutely. We can do that. Okay, so I think we are ready to adjourn. Anybody would like to move to adjourn the meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Brian and Brian again?
Brian and Brian. Way to go.